All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to give it a minute to allow people to enter the webinar today. Once again, good afternoon. Welcome to today's edition of our 49er Industry Chats. My name is Alana Tull-Oren. I'm the Alumni Outreach Specialist at Cal State Long Beach. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator and host of today's chat titled, So You Want to Be a Writer? The Rewards, the Drama, and Everything in Between. Our moderator for today is John Broadway. John Broadway is a proud alumnus of Cal State Long Beach, graduating in 2017 with a degree in journalism. As a student, he was very involved in campus life as a president's ambassador, member of the National Association of Black Journalists, and participant of the Leadership Academy. John has remained involved with the beach as an active volunteer, and we're very thankful for his time. So now I'll turn it over to John to go ahead and introduce our host.
Thank you for the introduction, Alana. Very excited to be here and introduce our awesome host today, Brian Addison, who is an alumnus of Cal State Long Beach, graduating in 2010 with his MFA in Theater Arts and Dramatic Writing. He's been a writer, editor, and photographer for over a decade. He's been covering everything from food and culture, transportation, and housing. And in 2015, he was named Journalist of the Year by the Los Angeles Press Club. And he has since garnered 25 nominations and 3 additional wins, including Best Political Commentary for his work at KCET in 2017, also Best Blog for Longbeachize in 2018, and Best Personality Profile for the Long Beach Post in 2020. In 2019, he was also awarded the Food and Culture Critic of the Year across many platforms at the National Art and Entertainment Journalism Awards. So please please join me in welcoming today's 49er Industry Chat host, Mr. Brian Addison.
Hello, everyone. Super awesome to be here. Yeah, I'm super happy to actually talk with a journalist graduate. John and I were just talking right before this happened, and I think people are sometimes shocked that I don't have a formal journalist background, but it is true. I have an MFA in writing from Long Beach State, not a degree in journalism. So it'll be nice to speak with someone who's a little bit more formally trained in the journalism background.
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited for this talk as well and to cover those topics. Do you want to start just by telling us a little bit more about your background, like where you grew up, how you got into writing, and what was kind of like the things that led you to the career path that you're on?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Big Bear, a small mountain town. Being a queer kid up there really wasn't the easiest or best of things, so I could hardly wait to get off the mountain. I did my undergrad at Cal State Fullerton, where I studied psychology with a focus in biopsychology, and I was actually planning on going into neurology, but I had what I called my quarter life crisis. I took a whole bunch of philosophy courses at the end of my degree that really messed with my head. And in the way that I phrase it, I drove up the coast, did a whole bunch of drugs, burned my medical school application, and volunteered in Africa to help with HIV/AIDS programs. It was there that I rediscovered my love of writing and applied for an MFA at Long Beach and returned back and completed that. And I mean, we'll just get straight to the journalism aspect. I kind of stumbled into journalism. The Long Beach Post at the time was a fraction of what it is now. It's grown into a full-blown newsroom. And at the time, it was run by Sean Lumaki, its founder, and he was searching for a new editor. And he reached out to me, and I was entirely baffled. I told him I had never studied journalism. And he said that's the reason why he wanted me to join, because he wanted someone who had perspectives and told stories in ways that journalists typically don't. So he had been following my Facebook and my Twitter. I then had a blog a WordPress blog when WordPress was literally just like a WordPress. You just like write journal entries. And he loved my writing. And then, yeah, from there, just continue to become more immersed in media.
Nice. I appreciate you kind of just mentioning how things weren't always an easy road for you, right? Like, and how you got to where you were. How do you think just some of the, I guess some of the struggles that you went with helped your writing or shaped it, I guess, and like your path as well?
That is such a good question, and it's actually deeper than people on the surface will instantaneously hear it. And it's also a really important subject in journalism about who tells what story, right? Yeah, like I said, I'm queer, so living in a small mountain town where there was just this constant struggle with abrasive religious fundamentalism, homophobia, racism, misogyny, just all the most horrible aspects of human behavior. It gives you a bit of empathy when you see people who are different than you, who struggle also for either, inherent characteristics they can't control, or things that they shouldn't be marginalized for. So I've just kind of always had a love of telling the stories of humans, because I think it's important. On that note, one of the biggest lessons I learned as I was writing, I think a lot of young writers they have this fire in them, and it's something I really miss, because after a little bit, you do admittedly become jaded. We'll get to that later, but like, you have this fire in you, and so you just want to tell any story that you find interesting. And as I got older and as I started writing more, that question of who tells whose story became really, really important for me. And I think particularly following, both the advent of the explosion of queer rights, the explosion of immigrant rights, and late, as of late, the BLM movement, the idea of who tells whose story is very important. And it's something that not only journalism, but every writer needs to consider. I think of the American Dirt controversy with Oprah about, a very white American woman writing a fictitious tale about a Mexican immigrant. I think these conversations are important. And as a young writer, I hope you consider that just because you have a fire in you to tell a story, you should first ask yourself if you're the one who should be telling it.
Yeah, I super appreciate that perspective, just because that was one of the reasons why I got involved with National Association of Black Journalists and founded the chapter here, was just because it's really important, as you said, like, who is telling these stories, right? How can we control our own narratives? And so I'm curious, when did you first become interested in writing? Was it when you were at CSULB studying for psychology, or was it maybe something after that kind of sparked your interest to get into writing, telling stories?
It's actually been my love since day one. I wrote a musical when I was 16. I wrote a novel when I was 17. And so it's just kind of always been in my blood. And I think the way I approached higher education, coming from this small town, we weren't very wealthy at all. My family was particularly poor, that the idea of college and higher education was job and money and prestige, right? That, getting those little letters after your name or getting these pieces of paper is what's going to guarantee you to be in a better state of affluence or influence. And I think, like I said, it just kind of hit me that as I was finishing my undergrad, is this really what I want? And I think that's a valid question. And for those out there, I'm 38 right now, and yes, I do call myself a writer, but I still don't know what I fully want for my career. And I think that's an okay question to ask yourself. And if you're young and you're watching this, and, I mean, John admitted to me, like, he's never actually like formally jumped into journalism post-graduation. And that's awesome. I think it's the tools you use with college that are far more important than what's on your degree. And yeah, for me, by the point I had reached the end of my undergrad, there was a real deep sense of unfulfillment. I love psychology. I love practically every subject if I dive into it enough, but was it something that was fulfilling my spirit? No. And that's kind of what returned me back to writing, and I'm also an elder millennial. So the advent of social media and self-publication was really booming just as I was in college. Like, yeah, Facebook was founded in my undergrad when you had to have like a .edu address. You actually had to have a college address to join Facebook initially. It was for college students only. So I got an early grasp of this self-publication thing, and that's what helped me rediscover my love of writing.
Nice. I'm curious if you ever had a mentor, or what kind of drew you to the MFA program? I know you mentioned that your family felt as if you needed these 3-letter words after your name in order to be successful. Do you feel like that was still influencing your path as you looked at the MFA program at CSULB, or did you have the kind of like that genuine desire to go there and engage that program for what it had to offer?
I would be 100% lying if I didn't say I liked the idea of the prestige of an MFA. For those who are watching, MFAs are really rigorous programs. Academically, they're typically 3 years, not 2 years with most other masters. And they're also terminal degrees. So you're able to go into teaching in higher ed like you would if you received your PhD in, of course, areas of the arts. So there is a sense of academic prestige about it, right? So I would be entirely bullshitting everyone if I said that didn't influence me a little bit. But what made it so much more easier to jump into was me being able to return to working with writers, with artists. I can't pull the data still off the top of my head, but there was a distinct difference between my scientifically focused psychology program versus my more artistic program. And that was honestly purely diversity in both, not only the people who were participating and the people who were educating, but their life experiences. The joke with my friends at Cal State Fullerton was we used to call it Cal State Full of White. And it's because our program was so white, so straight, and so male dominated. It was boring. And my MFA at Long Beach State was a beautiful array of experiences that humbled me, taught me empathy. My MFA was unquestionably the program that helped me shrink myself and helped me understand my own privilege. It helped increase my empathy tenfold. There is something about the arts, and I include journalism in the arts. I really do. That is about the extension of empathy toward fellow humans and better understanding how we can create a world where, as cheesy as it is, yes, we can get along, but also that people can be their own and own themselves better.
Yes, as someone with the journalism background, I would agree. There's kind of like that technical aspect of it where like it has like those nuts and bolts, but then really there's like the artistic expression of like how the journalist chooses to tell the story. And to your point, I think having empathy is such a huge part of that in order to really be able to establish that human connection, which is like at the foundation of like arts and writing. So I think that was spot on. Then getting back to what I mentioned earlier, so it sounded like you had a good experience at Long Beach State in terms of meeting a different array of people and having much more diversity than what you experience at Cal State Fullerton. Did you have an opportunity to connect with like a mentor while you were at the MFA program? And if so, how did you go about doing that, and what were the ways in which they helped you?
There were a handful of people that were essential in kind of making me a better human. For one of them, you know, Joanne Gordon and Alexandra Billings were the two people from the theater side. So my MFA was multidisciplinary. It involved the communications department, rhetoric, English, theater arts, film and TV. So there was this kind of like melding pot of different disciplines which require the pen. And but I swear to God, I know it sounds cheesy, but the biggest influence was the fact that for my program, we were required to grade the work of kids in an acting class, which, by the way, at the time was Long Beach State's most selected elective, was Introduction to Acting. It was a theater class. I forgot the number, but it was Introduction to Acting, and it had a crazy amount of sections, dude, like over 20 sections. And each class had like 100 kids. So you're dealing with thousands of kids from all over the university and all over different backgrounds. And I was grading, they were required to go to plays, go see plays and write about them. And it was the first time I realized how white my perspective was, how academic my perspective was, and how male my perspective was in a lot of the way I view art. And that was through a lot of students of color, particularly Black students and Latino students and female students who, when I saw their interpretations of plays I loved, it was mind-blowingly eye-opening about how art is interpreted, about how representation is interpreted, about how the stories we tell, whether it's journalistic stories or artistic stories and plays, affect everyone who sees them. So as much as I love the professors, and definite shout out to Dr. Joanne Gordon, retired, I think officially, and Alexandra Billings, who's just killing it on Broadway. It was those undergrad students, and there were hundreds of them, so I can't name an individual, and those hundreds of papers I read that really made me understand the importance of, again, that question, what story are you telling and who are you telling it for and who is listening?
Everything that you're saying, man, I feel like you're speaking my language as someone who appreciates the arts and writing and journalism. So keep it up. Keep it up.
Well, and there's an important aspect of journalism, you know, and I don't mean to like put the question back on you. I had this experience where when I was at the Long Beach Post, I was invited to speak at a church, right? And I told them about what the Post was and what they represent. And I asked for questions at the end, and there was a young Black woman who was there with her grandmother. And she asked me very, very bluntly, how do you plan on covering the communities that I'm a part of better and more? And, oh, did we lose a connection? You back?
I'm sorry. Back.
No, that's okay. Are we back? There was a young Black woman who was at church in the audience, and she asked me one of the most frank questions I've ever received, which was like, it was literally, how are you going to report stories that reflect me and my community? And I was like, let's have a sidebar. So I pulled her and her grandmother aside, and I was frank with her. I was like, like it's rough because journalism is so white dominated. And so the need for Black, brown, Asian writers is so hard. But then the conversation about emotional investment becomes involved, right? Because sometimes it's exhausting that after dealing with the weight of systemic racism, to then go into your job and you're the token person of color, therefore you're constantly handed these stories which cover, certain communities that you reflect. It also becomes exhausting. So she said that the reason she doesn't go into the field is because she's personally exhausted. So there's this really big conversation that journalism needs to have, and it's twofold. It's not just diversifying newsrooms. That's simple. Like, yes, of course you should have, especially in Long Beach, we should unquestionably have significantly more Black and Latino reporters. That's just an absolute given. Filipino, Cambodian, the list goes on. But also how to create workspaces where the people who tell the stories of their community can tell it without becoming emotionally exhausted or being told by higher editors to make their stories more focused or palatable for white audiences. I know that's like a really heavy thing, but it's such an important conversation in journalism right now. And it's reflected even at my, my former employer, the Post. If I can say that I'm proud of them on, many fronts, they have hired way more bilingual reporters. They translate some of their articles into Khmer if it's particularly important for the Cambodian community. Those small steps are essential, but the much bigger and larger picture is how do we get people who are actually part of these communities whose stories need to be told into proper newsrooms and also properly compensate them for their time and effort. It's one of the things that's a really big passion of mine.
Yes. I like how you touched on the twofold aspect of it, and like the one being the more obvious glaring one, and then the other one that's like more complex and complicated, but very much important, necessary as well too. I guess I'm curious. So, do you have any advice for a college student, or I guess anyone in general who is looking to follow the path of a writer and journalist? Can you share some tips of the trade that you have for them?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the obvious elephant in the room is that media is extremely unstable, right? We are long past the days of physical paid paper subscriptions. Yes, they still do exist. Yes, some papers still make money off of actually printing newspapers, but for the most part, the vast majority of news and stories that are consumed are through our phones and our computers and our televisions and through streaming services, right? So you all are brave for entering or deciding to focus the study on a field that is at the moment still trying to figure out what model works best. I mean, I cannot tell you the amount of national associations, conventions, and meetings that literally discuss how newsrooms can better strengthen their streams of revenue, how they can stay stable. So I don't mean to be all like doomsday and gloomy, but for those of you entering, you are not going to instantaneously get even an internship, let alone a job. Don't let that deter you. And if you don't want it to deter you as much, my suggestion is to always create content. I know that sounds so frustrating and so annoying, but having something that an editor or someone you're pitching to can look at and reference, it doesn't matter whether it was part of a newspaper or not. Like, do a blog. If you're doing photojournalism, keep like a photo site up, do an Instagram, even something as simple as an Instagram, something that documents what type of work you can do. And it already strengthens, you know, your pitch. Also pitch. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. Basically any news site will have information on whether they even accept pitches. They're called cold pitches from anyone. A lot do, you would be surprised. Or if you're interested in a particular beat, first off, you will not get that beat immediately. You will probably go through several positions before you get an actual beat because you're knowledgeable enough to cover that beat. But if you're interested in a beat, look at who runs that department of the paper. Reach out to them, ask them if they have time for a coffee. See if like, hey, is there any way that, you know, I could do a freelance gig for you? Could I do an internship? Those things, it takes initiative, and it's kind of exhausting because I know after graduating, y'all, you're like, dude, I just spent like 4 months working and now they want 5 years experience. What the hell? I know it's a conundrum, but it's kind of just constantly pushing. And that content creation, I'm telling you, is extremely important. And I don't want to overtake this question too much, but like it segues into an idea that I've always told journalists as I've been working with them, like your self-brand is so essential to your professional path. The archaic, because that's officially what it is, the archaic idea that journalists will be at a singular paper for their entire career, I think is very much long gone. And it's now shifted to where, because of the advent of social media, more people know individual journalists and pay attention to those individual journalists, especially if that journalist like conveys the work that they want to see and read about more so than a subscription to an entire entity like the Los Angeles Times. And so for new school journalists, I really suggest you guys start honing in on that self-brand. Like, what is your name and what is your identity and what do you do? Because if either your newspaper folds, your startup company that was a cultural site goes under, you still have a structural readership that you can transfer to other publications. And that is a selling point no matter how you put it.
Yeah, and just to kind of follow up on what you said, just kind of offering my own experience, like you mentioned two things that are really important, right? Just the constant need for continual content creation and self-branding. And I think two ways to really be intentional about that, at least the way I was just like creating my own blog on Medium, and then like just creating an email list of just like a bunch of people that I met in which like my articles would go out to. And through that, I've actually, the job that I have now is a direct result of that. And I also got like a side gig copywriting just as a result of like posting my blogs on LinkedIn and things like that. And so, yeah, that's the constant content creation and being intentional about the writing that you do in order to create that self-brand will open up opportunities to you. And then as you mentioned too, just the networking aspect is also a big part of that, right? Like meeting as many people and just staying in touch.
You know, and one of the most poisonous things that the digisphere age has created is we now can quantify our influence, right? Like we can now see how many people have liked our tweet, how many people have viewed the tweet, how many people have retweeted the tweet. We can look at how many people have read our blog, whether they're returning. We have this data, right, that is so specific. And why I say this is partially poisonous is because from a personal endeavor aspect, it seems like you create content in order to be seen more, you know, that your content isn't successful if it isn't seen by thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of eyes. And that is 1000% false. You literally were just talking about how, yeah, like I put these blogs up on LinkedIn, and whether 10 people read them or 10,000, the person who read it, who gave you the job, was the important one. And that's what I want to emphasize about content creation. Like, you got the young people out there, you're going to want that, like, I call it now like the TikTok euphoria. It's when it's like you first post a TikTok and it goes big and you just get like endorphins, dopamine, and serotonin like blowing through your mind and you get so excited about it. But that's a false sense of success because you need to perpetuate that. And that's not what content creation in terms of a long scale career is about. Like, it is really about honing your craft and being able to direct it to people who are influential. In your case, you had your email of people and it eventually linked you to an important job. So I want to make sure that there's the viral aspect of content, which of course any newspaper or creative cultural publication would be interested in. But in order to at least get into the field, what you create, despite how many people have seen it, is what you can forward to others to let them know what you do. And that is just as important. So don't be stymied by, the idea of shit. Like, dude, my blog hasn't even gotten a single read today. I'm telling you, just consistency is key. And if you are consistent with content, you will be shocked at the amount of people who will then follow you. And then they go back through your record and then they start reading old shit that you wrote. It's so important to continually write. My friend Sarah Bennett said one thing that was so hit home for me. Like, if you're a journalist, you're only as good as the last thing you wrote. Ooh, like, yeah. Like, so if the last thing you wrote was 2 years ago, why? So whether you're being read or not, create content. Can't tell you how important it is.
Yeah, you touched on such an important aspect. That's something I was dealing with as a writer too. Just this idea of like wanting to create impact with my writing, and like this idea of like, is it creating impact if not that many people are seeing it, and needing to have like this sense of like validation from it. But I think, kind of as you alluded to, the validation really needs to come from yourself, right? And like your own connection to what you're writing, and like the overall goal and vision you have for your career. Right? Would you say so?
Absolutely. Confidence is a fickle thing. It's like, is confidence real or is it just something we're telling ourselves, right? But in terms of your future career, right? Like, now there are more tools than ever to get your work out in fascinating and interesting ways. This is one of them. I mean, like, kudos to Long Beach State, like, to have alumni talk about things, like, but then there's other simple ways too. In terms of, like, let's talk Facebook, just Facebook off the top of my head. Like, Facebook has largely shifted the way it conveys and sells posts to people, right? And that was given the fallout from the 2016 election, when it was accused of spreading all this misinformation. So what a lot of its users realized was their threads were being throttled. Throttled meaning things that their friends were posting weren't being pushed to them as much. And so Facebook had this dilemma of, how do we keep the social culture alive, don't spread misinformation as bad, but also let people see what they want to see and choose what they want to see. So they created groups. And these groups are really important. I run a really big food one here, right? It has like 30,000 members. And this group has taught me so much about the importance of niches in writing. And if you are part of a community and you're telling a story that you think is important, but it's just not getting the hits on your blog that you thought, or an editor from a larger paper isn't taking the pitch from you, but you really believe in it, I can guarantee you there is a Facebook group with a decent following that will serve that niche and let you know, like, just join and type in, like, you guys, this is a story I have, and it will help you. So there's new avenues to create your readership. And it does go back to that self-brand and why it's important. So don't forget to explore avenues beyond the idea of the byline itself, like a byline with a proper paper. That's always going to be important. And yeah, it's never not cool to see your name in a paper, right? Like it's always cool. It's always elating, but developing your readership is way more than just whom you work for properly. It is, community engagement is important, and there's so many avenues for which you can do that, all from your phone or your laptop, and it's really kind of brilliant. So, you know, like, has, for all its faults, as social media evolves, it really is creating or attempting to create these places where even the most unknown of people can share really important stories.
So you've talked a lot about, so we've talked a lot about writing, right? And so I would love to just hear more about, I guess, your process with writing and like choosing stories and like what that looks like for you, just kind of from maybe even before the inception of an idea, and like how maybe that even comes about, and then the inception, and then kind of through to the finished product.
It's definitely evolved as I've gotten older. I think when I was younger, and I think a lot of journalists still do, they want to chase that like really big, grandiose story that pulls at heartstrings and shows some type of fracture in the system, and you know, really connects to this huge, either national or worldwide social problem. And I used to be that way, but I've learned that I work much better scaled down and listening to one person or one family's story, and then applying the big grand things if those things do apply. And these singular stories have come to me because I've just decided to engage my community. And I know that sounds so like, of course you engage your community. Well, no, what I'm talking about is like, you know, gonna drop Sarah Bennett's name again. She calls it parachute journalism, right? This idea that you can parachute into any city and news is quote unquote news. That's altering, because even if you're trying to objectively as hell tell, let's say, breaking news, no matter what, you're still coming from a perspective and a lens and a bias that you might not even know exists. And there's small things like misnaming a neighborhood, but that misnaming of a neighborhood, if it's in a crime story, has larger implications. So there's small things like that versus much larger things like using language that marginalizes people, the tendency for crime reporters to always quote policemen, but never really quote a person who was hit by a car crossing a street. So there's these ideas of, again, whose story you're telling and from what angle. And for me, it's always the community that you're connected with. And if you decide to invest in a community, which I know not everyone can do, a lot of people have to move for jobs, and that's going to include journalism. But even what I'm saying is, if you do move for a job, invest in that place, walk around and talk to people, get to know them. It's not necessarily like, even as a gay man, it's not necessarily I'm offended by a straight person writing about the neighborhood. No, not at all. I would love to have more allies write about the neighborhood. What I want, though, is that you know our neighborhood, you know people, you know the businesses. And I think it's the same with any community. You know, we had a really great speaker who was one of the assistants for Barack Obama, and now she does like coaching classes for, you know, newsrooms about increasing diversity and stuff. And she even said, you know, like, as a Black woman, it's not that I don't want white people to not tell our stories. You need to be able to tell it, though, with the full weight and knowledge of that community, and that takes engagement. So you have to engage in your community, writers. Like you have to know it, get to know your neighbors, get to know your people. And the best part about that, the stories then come to you because they trust you. They ask you to tell the story. And there's nothing more cool than after you've been doing all this work for so long, you get the text, hey, I want you to tell this story. It becomes an honor. It never gets old, I promise you, but it does take work, and it's a lot of work, and it's uncomfortable work too. You know, I say that as a white person who's written about the Black community here in Long Beach. It is a frank reality. And that took work though. It took work engaging with that community, talking with Black leaders, talking with Black neighbors, and talking with Black friends. Like those are uncomfortable things for some people, especially white people or straight males. But those are the things you need to do, in my opinion, if you are an editor, journalist, or writer of any community.
Yeah, definitely so. And just to kind of add into what you're saying in terms of like engaging in the community, getting to know them. For myself, my own experience, you know, as I was looking to get more involved in my community, particularly like the social justice space, it was really as simple as just like looking on like Eventbrite and like different social media pages for just events that were hosted in like the area of interest. So I would kind of also like to add on what you're saying, like if you have a particular area of interest that you think you would want to know more about or engage more in the community, just go on those social media pages, see what events they're hosting, go onto their websites, sign up for newsletters, just go to as many events, digital or in person as possible, and just follow people. And it's honestly, at least from my experience, it was very refreshing to see how kind of easy it was to get connected just through like that intention and that follow-up. So yeah, anything to add on to that? Or?
1000%. Like, you will be shocked at how much your own community does that you knew nothing about when you start seeing those things and going to those things. You will find out there are so many leaders who are dedicated to social justice, to human rights, and you then discover this person has been doing this dedicatedly for 1, 2, 3, 4 decades, and you now have a connection to a resource of a wealth of knowledge. Yeah, I 1000%. Those community meetings are so essential. And, you know, of course, there's, you know, a lot of them can be, you know, like city council meetings and stuff can be unquestionably dry, and they certainly bring out characters. But those community-led meetings are just wells of resources.
That was a great nice metaphor. Wells of resources, very much so. Especially just because when you're involved with community-oriented organizations, they pride themselves on being resources to individuals in the community. So that is spot on. So after hearing about just, you know, obviously more of your background, right? Like more of your writing process, and, you know, how you kind of done work to engage the community, even communities that you don't necessarily come from. Can you share anything about any current projects that you're working on that you're really excited about, or maybe one that you just finished up that you're really excited about as well?
Yes. I'm working on I'm working on 2 stories. One for Eater LA. It's about this North Long Beach Peruvian place called El Pollo Imperial. What I love about it is it's the opposite. You know, we always talk about how corporate entities, especially food eateries and fast food, come in and take over small businesses. Well, this was a former KFC, and a Peruvian family decided to take it over. They keep the drive-through alive, and straight up offer this like array of Peruvian food. And it's so cool for me on so many levels, because it's North Long Beach, which rarely gets any good coverage, let alone about its food, which is changing and changing for the good. It's my first time writing for Eater LA, so it's cool to like represent Long Beach finally, like in a bigger LA scene. And I just love this idea that Latino food is much more than Mexican food, and it's something that isn't often discussed. And this Peruvian family is just unapologetically Peruvian. So I love that. But then the other big story last week, I went up also to North Long Beach. Organic Harvest Farms is this Black owned and operated organic farm, and it's ran by Rod Dodd. He's a long time and dear friend. I love him so much. He actually just had a Black History dinner, which was really cool on his farm, where we got to learn about how our enslaved Black population fed the White House and how that food trickled down to create what we largely consider like American food, soul food, greens, fried chicken, collards, you know, like, and it was just a really cool experience. And so I finally asked him, I was like, you know, it would be like such an honor if I could write about you. Like, you know, would you allow that? And he was totally game. So I went up to his farm, and there's just something beautiful about Rod that like I cannot explain to you guys. He has a little bit of country in him, which I do too. My dad's side is from Oklahoma and Mississippi and Louisiana. His side's from Texas. So he loves fishing, but what he does in terms of farming and creating like a reconnection to nature is so cool on so many levels. And it's like the things I forget about. So he finally got this farm to himself, right? And that's what he's always wanted, because he has these ideas. And his biggest thing is just teaching people. And so he gets kids from Long Beach Unified who have never seen a farm, let alone been a part of it. And he calls it From Seed to Harvest to Plate. And he lets these kids over the course of a year grow their food, harvest their food, and then have this like big dinner on the farm. And, you know, it's mostly Black and brown kids. And it's just so beautiful and awesome. And these kids become so attached to where their food comes from. And it then leads to questions about why they don't have more fresh produce in their communities and why they don't have marketplaces. So he's influencing in that sense. And then he has a deep connection to the veteran community. So he's building this, he was given land by a department of the county, and I forgot who, I don't have my notes with me, where he's building this farm for veterans and seniors, veterans with PTSD and seniors with movement disability and Alzheimer's, because farming helps them calm down and center themselves. And with the seniors, it allows them social interaction, which is essential for helping with like Alzheimer's. So this guy's heart is just like, if every human were like Rod, you know, he's like, our world would just be a better place. So yeah, I love him so much. I cannot wait to get that story up. It means a lot to me, and I'm beyond like privileged he's allowing me to tell it.
Those definitely sound like the two very interesting stories. So you said one will be on Eater LA, and then where can we find the other one?
On my site, Longbeachize. Yeah, again, people, you know, I've had Longbeachize for, God, I wish Baktosh was here. Baktosh is the person that originally founded it, and then I helped create content for him. And I mean, I think a decade. It's crazy. But yeah, so longbeachize.com. Again, that content, people, like, you know, and I'm not paid for it, but it's important. And those current articles is what got Eater LA to say, yeah, we would love to have you write for us. So again, those that content creation is really important. It really is. And you'll get tired and take breaks. Mental health is important. I also understand writing is, I don't know about you, John, but it can take a lot. Like if a story is particularly emotional, whether it's connected to you personally or whether it's a subject you're just passionate about, you will like hit that submit button and it can feel like you literally just hiked 10 miles. Like there's a mental exhaustion there that I don't know if non-writers understand, but it can really take a toll. So for writers out there who need time, take that time between pieces. I know sometimes it's the rat race content creation, but it's also quality. So don't always think about quantity, like with your content creation.
Yeah, that was spot on. I did a writing project around institutional racism throughout history from slavery until the current day, and I have never felt more weight and just like I needed a break after that. So that was definitely an example of when you need to take a break after writing. So I guess just to kind of close things out, which sucks a little bit because we've been having such a great conversation. But I know you've covered just a lot of just tips around writing and things like that. I wonder if, to close things out, you have, I guess, just one of like the biggest life lessons you learned that you would like to share, or just, I guess, kind of a general piece of advice that you would give to maybe not just writers, but kind of anyone maybe who's on the cusp of graduating and looking for some guidance and finding the path that's right for them, or attaining this this thing called success.
Yeah, I'm still searching for that thing called success. You know, it kind of goes back to a point I kind of reiterated earlier, but I want to elaborate like a little bit more on about what this concept of a college degree is. And, you know, for me, I would really love a shift in the American discussion that, you know, college isn't this end goal. College is a tool, and higher education is a tool. You know, the reason why when you do your undergraduate degree, you're not going into an immediate specific field of study, and that's solely what you focus on, but the university requires you to explore these other arenas and these other disciplines, is because it's the idea that, you know, the world evolves and you have to adapt to that evolution. And for me, the greatest tool that higher education provides is empathy and what I like to call recentering yourself. So I think every human has this auto return position where it's kind of just like your brain just immediately goes to that route. And it could be something as simple as, you know, you had a really bad day and then you find yourself sitting in traffic and you just want to like scream and yell at these people because all these people are in your way and you deserve a break from this crazy ass traffic because you had a stressful day. And what my higher education experience, especially, you know, the interactions with people, has taught me is to decenter myself. It's not all about me. And everyone out there has a struggle. And what one of the most beautiful things you can do is to teach yourself, like, maybe it's not just that. Maybe they're also going through something, and not to go to that default setting of why is something in my way, and learning to empathize more. You know, I know for some that might sound a little cheesy, but, you know, it's true. I don't name drop often, but I really do think of David Foster Wallace's "This is Water" speech. You know, it's this idea that we're all in the same ocean. We're all in the same ocean. We are all humans, and there are levels of what humans go through, and it's recognizing that that will help us better get along. And that's what an education does for you. And if you can exert that empathy into the world, what I do believe the world will return to you are better answers for what you should do professionally, where you should live, what choices you should make, because you're understanding other people's experiences and they provide you with that in return. So there really is a reciprocal relationship. Are you going to instantaneously go into the job that you love? I don't think so. And I don't think that's pessimistic. I think it's wonderful. And I think you should be able to prepare for it. You don't have to do your degree. You didn't go into journalism formally. I didn't go into psychology. That's okay. And those are things that we need to tell kids graduating, that it's okay. The ones that don't graduate, that doesn't matter either. Like, did you get something from your experience? Was it worth it? Are you able to better adapt to a world that is constantly changing? So, you know, and then on a more like fundamental, less heady philosophical sense, like, don't be afraid to try stuff. You know, I was a barista after I got my MFA, And I have no shame in that. It was one of the best experiences I had, is meeting people every day, getting their coffee, learning stories. Don't be afraid to do something because you think it's either below you, which is very dangerous, or that it's also dangerous, too much for you. That job is, I don't deserve that job. I don't have enough experience. Apply for it. Why not? Do it. If it's a job you want, try it. If it's a job you don't want, maybe try it, and you always have the option to leave. But, you know, I love people who've always had experiences that vary, and you know, that's what I would tell people. I know it's cheesy, but I really do live by that.
Definitely not cheesy at all, but very much needed. I would echo the same sentiments, just based off my experience as well. So thank you so much for all the wisdom and knowledge that you've dropped on us.
Oh, thank you for volunteering your time, by the way. But I genuinely mean that. Like, people don't give credit for that. That takes time, people. So if you're out there, like, give John applause, because he's doing this on his own time, and it's awesome and important. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I wasn't expecting that, but thank you.
Yes, thank you both, John and Brian, for just an amazing, engaging, inspiring, and very thoughtful industry chat today. We really appreciate you both taking the time to talk to all of our viewers. And as a reminder, the session was recorded and it will be live on our website in just a few days. And we'll also go ahead and email that to you as well, in case you wanted to rewatch this and get re-inspired. Brian, would you be open to people connecting with you on like LinkedIn, following you on social media?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just give you all my information that you can hopefully later attach to the video or something.
Sure.
I'm on Facebook. All my social media is public because all my social media is professional driven. None of my social media is really like personal. It's all about my writing and stuff. And my messages are all public and open, which sometimes I regret, but nonetheless, yeah, it's all open. So absolutely, do not hesitate to connect. Email is actually the worst. Lana will tell you I am
figured
horrible
that,
with email. But yeah, social media is easy, and I literally accept everyone. I engage with as many people as I can. So yeah, absolutely feel free to reach out.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Brian. And you can, we have a link to our website over here where you can find the recording of the chat in just a few days. And also our social media is at CSULB Alumni as well. You can follow us there. And if you have any follow-up questions for Brian or want his contact info, you can email us directly at alumni@csulb.edu as well. So we thank you so much for joining us today. And yeah, until next time, thanks again.
Thank you.